and I must admit it's not complete. There are countries which are missing, like the Far East, under the Japanese, and Iraq. But what we did was a big thing. It's only the beginning. And it takes a long time to make inroads. It's sold at Steinmetzky at Yad Vashem, but still there's still a struggle to get it into the bookstore at the Wiesenthal Museum bookstore, and this really indicates that it's not important. It's a strange phenomenon in Western eyes, and essentially this is part of the Jewish people, and it's part of our culture. Every Jew can take pride in the fact that the Sephardic culture is his or her culture, and not just something different. And this is problematic, because it's not only giving credit to where credit's due. The question is, how are Eastern Jews integrated in the Jewish world? Do we have two different communities living side by side? And this is much less of a problem in America, but it's a big problem in Israel. And when your ethnic heritage is not recognized, when you have to create your own museum to put your own ethnic group in, it's problematic. So, in other words, there's no Sephardic museum encompassing all the other Jews, and that would also tell the story of Sephardic roots of many of Ashkenazic Jewry. And so it creates animosity, it creates hostility, it creates resentment. The backfire of this is the Shas phenomenon. In the 50s, there were no yeshivot for Sephardim and Mizrahim. The Mapai secular regime totally cut off their cultural roots, their heritage. And now we're paying for it. The rebound is Shas, who dressed like 16th century Polish noblemen, weren't accepted in Bnei Brak, and they want a new style of Haredi Judaism. Whereas the real Sephardic culture and tradition and the rabbinic tradition has fallen by the wayside, or is delegitimized. And it affects halachic issues today. Rav Amar, instead of being an independent Sephardic thinker, is afraid of the backs. He's looking over his back. He's afraid of the ultra-Orthodox. So therefore, he canceled 50,000 Orthodox conversions. He doesn't want to relate to Agunah. And these are big issues, very big issues. But part of the way to tackle these issues is to relate to this other culture, to find out what this other culture is. Because if people knew what the Sephardic traditions were, they wouldn't accept this bunk. And when you out of the blue cancel 50,000 conversions of devoted Jews, it's a major problem. And one day, maybe one of your relatives will want to marry the descendant of one of these Jews. And what do you do?
How does your social, political, religious activism fit with your scholarship? Do they complement each other, or are they antagonistic, or how do you deal with like the two sides of you, the disinterested scholar and the activist?
Well, I'm like basically, I'd say I think it complements each other. I try to be objective. I'm critical of Sephardim. I'm critical of Sephardic organizational life. I haven't said the last word. When I received a lot of resistance when I tried to organize the Sephardic March of the Living. In the end, I pressured a lot of organizations to get on, but they would only give a token of help, and it wasn't enough. There was a guy named Nissim Gaon who had a loan fund of $500 million. And even before he went under, because he gave loans to the Russians and never was paid back, he essentially abandoned the Sephardic world. There's no active World Sephardic Federation. They don't do anything. Okay? So I write about these things. And if you can see, I write about it critically in the... I've written about it critically, for example, in the New Encyclopedia Judaica. Read what I've written about Jewish communities and how they're run. Yeah? I'm extremely critical. You have to be diplomatic and work with some of these people. But in terms of scholarship, I don't spare any of them. And there are serious scandals. There's serious embezzlement. There's serious leadership scandals. And I've written about these things.
Which entries in the Encyclopedia Judaica?
A lot. You look at, I'll think about Sephardim, 1992, celebrations, Greece. You look under various countries, communities. And so one time someone said to me a long time ago, you're not really noticed, but what you write is important. And that's what's important. And he said, that's why I have to know you. Because I know you're going to write many things, for better and for worse, which will be the last word. And area specialists have an impact. In other words, I'm not creating things, I'm writing what is. I don't write things off the top of my head. Historians base things on documents, they base them on sources. Actually, the Holocaust, in terms of the historiography of the Holocaust, much of that is based on oral history, because they have no choice, and it's based on individual stories. But what happens in a community isn't based on individual stories. It's based on documents, it's based on articles, it's based on interviews with community leaders and constant contact. So maybe the leaders come and go, but I'm not coming and going, and my students aren't coming and going, and so this continues. So if you have a devoted enough scholar, and despite everything you think about education being watered down, there are students, and there are younger scholars, and people care. And so this is where it meshes. Sometimes, you decide not to write things, but for the most part, I write things, and I try to write it in a very diplomatic method, and I try to be balanced. In other words, I may be critical, but I'll also give people credit when credit is due. And there are changes in the Jewish world. There are changes positively in the Jewish community. So I write about these things. I write about when there's repopulation. I write about measures when, communities fund rabbis when in the past they haven't, etc., etc. When they have adult education, when they strengthened day school education. But that also does not deflect from corruption and stealing. And the issues here are that basically Jewish communities are out of touch, because if they weren't out of touch, they would prosper much more. And they would be much more moral. They'd be much more accountable. And it's not the issue of lack of transparency. The issue is the democratization. There's very little democratization in the Jewish world. And that's a problem. And we're not dealing with the Jewish society 300 years ago, where you have a few donors, a few what are called gvirim, and a few rabbis who control communities. Today, people are much more aware. The demands are much more, and people have the right to know. But despite the fact that internet and modern technology has opened the world up, very few people take advantage of it. And another hat, which my interviewer here doesn't really realize, is that for the last 18 years, I edit a monthly email publication on Sephardic Jewry, which has in total about 20,000 readers. It has about 4,000 or 5,000 active monthly readers, and my book reviews are looked at, and people in museums and people in university libraries order the books that I review, and I talk about all sorts of issues. And I talk about these issues. I've written about them many times. My readers know about these issues, about the Holocaust corruption, about the survivors not receiving reparations, and all sorts of scandals. And I also had a radio program. So I'm an activistic scholar, but and there are people who wouldn't collaborate with me, like Daniel Sperber. He said it was beneath his dignity to be on radio. But I brought to the Jewish world some of the best minds.